why do people end up with low vitamin D levels? What causes vitamin D deficiency?
There are a variety of reasons why you might end up having low levels of vitamin D. In the UK, for example, obviously the climate here, the fact that we're 55 degrees north, it means that their access to sunlight is less in northern countries like the UK, and likewise in the southern hemisphere. So you can only really be assured of getting a lot of sunlight access if you live in and around the equator. So yes, it could be simple geography, but also there are other factors. For example, if you have dark skin pigmentation, you need more photons of sunlight to create the same amount of vitamin D if you have darker skin pigmentation. So somebody who has darker skin pigmentation living in a country like the UK is always going to be at greater risk of vitamin D deficiency, whereas if they lived in the tropics, that probably wouldn't apply. And likewise, if you're somebody whose dress code, it means that you cover up more when you are out, then you will have less skin exposed. You do need to have your arms and face exposed to sunlight in order to make adequate amounts of vitamin D in any country. And so if you do cover up, then you're less able to do that. Elderly people, for example, who may be housebound, they may also be at risk of vitamin D deficiency because they're simply not getting out so much. If you use a lot of sunscreen is a sensible thing to do if you're sunbathing, but it will block vitamin D production in your skin. And so there are, and some of it is just basic work practices. I worked for 10 years in California and Los Angeles, but I was checked for my vitamin D levels, and I'd been there for a few months, and I was vitamin D deficient. And that was principally because I was working so hard. I would get into the car, drive to work, and I'd be covered in parking lot, then go into work, and I was rarely outside. And so I wasn't making as much vitamin D as you might suppose, living in a very sunny place. So it is possible. And a good example of this is in places like Saudi Arabia, where there's a high prevalence of low vitamin D levels because people cover up so much. They have to. It's a very sunny place and very hot, and people don't want to get sunburned. So, you know, it is quite easy to become vitamin D deficient, even when sunlight is around. So.
I have read that between October and April, the British Isles does not receive sufficient solar radiation for even the most determined sun worshipper to make adequate quantities of vitamin D. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. This goes back to 2015, the Science Advisory Council on Nutrition in the UK. They made we were the first country, you have to be proud about it, first country to openly admit that we are vitamin D deficient as a nation. And they said that we, as a nation, we could not guarantee that everybody would maintain adequate levels of vitamin D all year round. And they particularly focused on, yes, that period between October and, well, actually, often it's the way people mention it is when the clocks go back and when they go forward, that's really the time when you should be actively supplementing with vitamin D. And I personally take the supplements all year round because, you know, even in the summer, it's not that great here. I know it wasn't too bad this year, but certainly the winter months, absolutely. Our position on the globe means that when sunlight hits the surface of anything, it's spread out more. If you're living on the equator, the sunlight is a photon of light hits a smaller area of skin, and therefore it has more energy and makes more vitamin D. Whereas if it's spread out because of the angle of the globe, I mean, it's trivial things like this, but it does make a difference. And so yeah, during the winter months, absolutely, I think everybody should be given vitamin D supplements.
So in that case, how do we balance the need for sufficient sunlight to make vitamin D whilst minimizing the risk of skin cancer through overexposure to sunlight? Are dietary supplements needed?
I think it's important to recognize that we are aware of potential damage that can be done to our skin by being in sunshine. And that's really why the supplement story has become quite prominent. And your original question about why places like North America have less vitamin D deficiency, and that's partly because they are further south than we are in the UK. So geographically, potentially have more access to sunlight. We do supplement milk and orange juice, for example, which can help. I think there's greater awareness in those countries of potential risk of vitamin D deficiency. So people take supplements more generally in the general population, particularly amongst the elderly people, for example. But within North America, there is still a high prevalence of vitamin D deficiency in African-American communities, where darker skin pigmentation means that it is more difficult to make vitamin D. So it's not the whole of the North America that is vitamin D replete. There are communities where this is still a significant problem. But it does also, yes, it does highlight quite clearly why people have been talking a lot about how we should approach this without sending everybody out into the sunlight. How can we supplement? Could this be done through food fortification? And that's has certainly worked in some countries. Places like Finland, for example, they did fortify foodstuffs and had some great success in raising the general vitamin D levels in the population. We're making, I think, good inroads in the UK in trying to approach this issue. I think it will become more prominent in the next few years, principally because the technology to put vitamin D into foodstuffs has improved. So previously, like in North America, it used to be in orange juice and milk, for example, but not all communities use those products. So something that may be more accessible is flour. If you can put vitamin D into flour, most communities use flour regularly. And that could be a better way of getting a more even supplementation or fortification of vitamin D in the general population. So I think there's an awareness of this trade-off. We get a lot of vitamin D from sunlight, but too much could be damaging. And this is why supplementation has become a discussion point.